Hey everyone, welcome to Fast Talk, your source for the science of cycling performance. I'm your host, Chris Case. Unfortunately, concussions and traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs, are far too common in cycling. Whether training on open roads, racing at high speeds, or facing off with rush hour traffic on your bike commute, cyclists often place themselves in vulnerable situations. Head injuries are becoming increasingly diagnosed among the two-wheeled crowd. And what's more, there's a good deal of misunderstanding about what exactly the terms concussion and TBI mean. Are they the same or very different? How should you manage each condition? What are the potential long-term repercussions of concussions, for instance, if any? We'll tackle all of these questions and many more in this episode. We turn to Dr. Steven Broglio, the director of the University of Michigan Concussion Center and the director of the NeuroTrauma Research Laboratory at the university, for guidance on this complex subject. Dr. Broglio has spent much of his adult life studying the causes of concussion, the effects of concussion on the brain, the short and long-term concerns, the best course of management, and the use of helmets, of course. His experience and knowledge on the matter make for a compelling discussion. Add to that the conversations I had with Timmy Duggan and Hannah Finchamp, two athletes who have each suffered head injuries. Timmy's story is well known. While racing at the Tour of Georgia, he was involved in a horrific crash which led to a severe traumatic brain injury. And today, he shares his experience from the injury to the acute aftermath and rehabilitation to the long-term and psychological impact the injury had on his life. You'll hear from him throughout the episode. And Hannah walks us through how being hit by a car led to her concussion and how that impacted training and life. All that and much more on today's episode of Fast Talk.
Listeners, we have exciting news coming soon from Fast Talk Laboratories, our education, coaching, and community membership. Sign up for our free listener member level at fasttalklabs.com. We'll stay in touch with everything that's new. Plus, listener members get access to our searchable podcast episode transcripts and our forum. Don't miss out. Join for free at fasttalklabs.com.
Well, we welcome Dr. Steve Broglio to the episode today. Thank you for joining us on Fast Talk.
Great. I appreciate the invitation to be here and talk about my two favorite subjects, concussions and bikes.
Give everybody out there a sense of your immense experience and background in this area of concussions, TBIs, and that sort of thing.
I started in this space somewhere around 2000, and kind of, for those that were in and around athletics at that time will probably remember that was a period when somebody had a concussion, and they would walk to the wrong sideline, you would chuckle and send them back into the game, point in the right direction, send them back in the game, and kind of continued with the work through grad school, which I finished up in 2006. And right around that time, I think that the national conversation around concussion shifted quite dramatically. If you think about it was kind of when the first modern CTE case, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy case, was identified. And then it's just been a whirlwind since that point. We've been pretty fortunate to have pretty good funding and try to contribute to the literature on trying to understand injury identification and management and what are the long-term effects. I've been doing that since 2006 in a formal way, and at the University of Illinois to start, and then now I'm finishing up my 10th year here at the University of Michigan. And
you are the director of the Michigan Concussion Center and the director of the NeuroTrauma Research Laboratory there.
That is correct. So the lab has been here as long as I've been here. So we started that when I came in, and then the center we're coming up on our second anniversary here in a month or two, which is funded by our university president. So Dr. Schlissel saw something in that, and we're just trying to make sure that we do the good work and get the message out.
And it should also be mentioned that you were a bike racer, an elite level, Cat 1, you said, bike racer. Not sure how much you ride these days because of all this work that you're doing, but you have a background in this sport, so you know it from that angle as well.
Yeah, so started riding, racing in my teen years, and I would say I kind of officially hung up the wheels, I don't know, probably in my 30s when work and family kind of got too much to handle, but still ride pretty much on a daily basis in my basement. A lot of Zwift Zwift World Championships type of things going on at 5 o'clock in the morning down there.
I think you might have just coined a new COVID term. Daily basement.
Daily basement.
There you go. There you go.
Well, let's jump into this what I know will be a fascinating conversation about these two things, cycling and concussions. It is a serious concern for cyclists. There is a lot of misunderstanding out there, I'm certain, about the different terms that are thrown around, about the different symptoms that people see. We will also get into the fact that it might not necessarily present at the same way in a cyclist as it would in another athlete from a different sport, football or soccer or something like that. But maybe we should really start at the very beginning, which is defining some terms. Concussion, TBI. Give us the very basic definition of those terms, if you would.
TBI is traumatic brain injury, and probably the easiest way to think about it is that's the umbrella term for all injuries that occur to the brain. And then within TBI, we have three, large buckets, if you will: mild traumatic brain injury, moderate traumatic brain injury, and severe traumatic brain injury. When we talk about moderate and severe, we're talking about varying degrees of structural damage to the brain, and then the cognitive and other impairments that come with that. Mild traumatic brain injury, or the least severe, obviously, is often used interchangeably with concussion, and there's a bit of debate around that, to be quite honest. So some people will use them hand in hand, and concussion is just a little bit easier. When you're talking to individuals, concussion is just an easier way to express that. Others feel that concussion is its own entity, separate from mild traumatic brain injury, and it might be the mildest of the mild, if you will. So that's kind of, on a large scale, that's a way to think about it. I think when we talk about concussion specifically, at least the way it's conceptualized in the sporting context and cycling, to be honest, there's over 100 definitions in the literature that are out there. I was on a group we published a paper last fall, so there's another definition. I'm on another group that there's probably going to be another definition later this year. And so part of that is a lot of groups want their own definition, and then part of that is just how the science has advanced over time. And just because you wrote a definition yesterday doesn't mean it's going to stand up for all eternity. So we learn more, and then we revise the things that we learn. But really, the way to conceptualize it is it is a traumatic brain injury, and it's induced by a biomechanical force, and that force can be either a direct impact, and the easiest one is like a helmet head to the ground in a cycling case, or helmet to helmet in a football case, or sometimes it can be an indirect impulse. So not so much in cycling, but if you think about a football player being tackled around the chest, running down the field, being tackled around the chest, it's almost this impulsive force that comes up through the neck and then into the brain. And really what that results in is the really rapid onset of neurological or impaired neurological function that will resolve on its own over time. And that resolution, it varies. We might get into this, I think, maybe a little bit more, but on average, it's about 2 weeks. But really, I think up to a month is probably more of a normal recovery period for most people. That outward expression of clinical signs and symptoms, so the headache, the nausea, the fatigue, the mental impairment, is representative of a functional disturbance within the brain and not a structural disturbance, at least on a macro level. So if you were to take someone to the emergency room, put them in a CT scan or an MRI scan, there wouldn't be damage to the soft tissue of the brain. You wouldn't see anything. But at the cellular level, the way the cells are functioning, that has been altered. The neurons get stretched. You get this imbalance in the ions between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, and it just doesn't function properly. The signal doesn't propagate down the neuron as it should. And that's the slow to respond. That's the increased reaction time, the inability to remember things. That's kind of where that comes from. The other thing to think about, this is more from the medical side of things, but the other thing to think about is when someone suspects this has happened, they need to make sure that it can't be explained by something else that's going on. So drug use, alcohol use, medications, cervical injury, vestibular injury, like all those sorts of things can happen simultaneously. Well, the other injuries can happen simultaneously, and they may present like concussion. So vestibular disorders, people get dizzy, they may have headache. You can have neck injury that results in headache. So those may present like concussion, but aren't actually concussion. So the medical practitioner needs to make sure that they can differentiate between the cervicogenic headache or a vestibular headache and a concussion-based headache. So it gets very complex, particularly in the world of cycling. You're on the side of the road and you have to make a decision in 30 seconds so they can get back into the group. As opposed to even on a football sideline, we see this all the time where symptoms evolve over time and they get it wrong and somebody comes back into play. It's not as clear cut, I think, as most people would like it to be. It's not like a broken bone where you can put them in an X-ray, you see the broken bone, and it's a done deal. There's a lot more that goes into it from that perspective.
We're certainly going to get more into that, but something I want to bring up right now with your definition of concussion and TBI. I found this really interesting. You wrote a review. So back in 2015, you had a conference about concussions in Michigan and wrote a great review of what was discussed at that conference. And something that really caught my attention, at first surprised me, but then made sense, was on the one hand, you talked about all the great awareness in the last 10, 15 years about concussion and all the great research that's leading to, but did point out a negative to this, which is a large percentage of concussions are going to resolve in 2 to 4 weeks. And there does seem to be this perception now, at least in the media, that a kid gets a concussion and this is for life.
Yeah, so I think two things. I'm glad you brought that up. So I think there's two things. I think commonly we hear that the normal time to recovery is 14 days. And I had said the average time to recovery, and I'll stand by that. So I think a lot of medical providers relay that information. If somebody comes into their office and they're diagnosed with a concussion and they say, within 2 weeks, you should be fine. And then immediately on day 15, when they're not fine, the athlete and potentially the parents for that matter start to panic. What's wrong? I'm not recovered and things aren't right. But the reality is it's 90% of people recover within a month. So 50% within 2 weeks, 90% within a month. So if you just happen to be in the 51st percentile, then you're extending beyond that 2-week window, then the psychology starts to play into this, right? You start to think about, well, why do I have these symptoms? What's not going right? And people can go down a rabbit hole and cyclists being, you spend a lot of time alone on the bike and, you start to become very internally focused and you know that your left pinky toe is off a little bit today and things don't feel right. And so you start to people start going down this rabbit hole and all the psychology starts to overlay with the biology of the injury. And then maybe you have a parent that's kind of, well, Johnny, are you okay today? Or Jane, are you okay today? And then, so then you get the social aspect, right, that overlays with this. Or, you should be okay and you're not okay. So all this stuff starts to interplay with each other. The other side of that is there is definitely a fear. We see this all the time because the way that the injury is portrayed in the media, including a movie, major motion picture titled Concussion, that, if you have an injury, you are destined to have some sort of long-term neurodegenerative outcome. And that is simply not the case. We do not see it. I would never recommend go hit your head. I think that's bad, but we have absolutely no reason to believe that 1-2 concussions that are identified quickly and managed well, that the patient should have any reason or any cause for concern for a poor outcome. Now, there are cases, and I think we're going to talk about this later on, where people have an injury and it's not managed well. Maybe they return to play too quickly. Or they're never removed from play and they have multiple head impacts, particularly while they're still injured, or more severe injuries that have long-term consequences. But a routine concussion in and of itself, we have no real reason to believe that there's a long-term issue.
I think that the other side of this media, looking at it from the media's point of view, I guess they're trying to make stories, of course, or not make stories, but they latch onto stories and sometimes turn them into something that they're not. And you've seen maybe the terminology, a concussion epidemic. From your point of view, is that something that exists?
No, I don't think there is an epidemic. I think what's happened, particularly since around 2006, 2007, when concussion became, a common terminology, at least, within everybody's vernacular, is that we're starting to pay attention to the injury a lot more and deal with the injury a lot more. So when I talk to the athletic medicine folks here at Michigan, some of whom have been on sidelines for 30 plus years, and they'll tell you like there's no more injuries than there's ever been. We just don't ignore them. Particularly if you think back to the 80s and the 90s, like I said, somebody would have a concussion, they'd walk to the wrong sideline, and you would laugh and pull them back and on to the next play. And now we recognize that as a brain injury, and they're removed from play and they're managed, and it gets documented. So it's more about recognizing the injury and treating the athlete for the injury, as opposed to just ignoring them and really treating it as a blow-off type of thing.
As Chris mentioned at the top of the show, Timmy Duggan agreed to sit down for an interview about his experience having a traumatic brain injury. Here he is now with the story of what happened.
Let's just start by having you describe, for those that don't know, how you suffered a TBI. Take us through, if you're willing to, what happened to you in that race.
My incident was in 2008. And I was racing the Tour of Georgia at the time with Team Garmin. And so they tell me, I don't remember any of this. So sure. Everything I'm going to say is all, I guess, hearsay. And I think it was stage 4 or something. And, I remember lining up at the start on that day, I think, and that's kind of where it ends. But anyways, halfway through the stage, we're descending some big descent. We're going 60 miles an hour or something. At the bottom of the descent, there's this bridge with these expansion joints in it or something. And somebody in front of me got their wheel stuck in that and crashed in front of me. And then I guess was unable to avoid it. So I crashed into them and basically did a 60 mile an hour swan dive into the pavement. And yeah, like I said, I don't remember anything. Thankfully we were really close at that moment in the stage to Athens, Georgia, where they have a world-class medical facility there. So I didn't even have to get in a helicopter or anything. Kind of my next memory was, I don't know, probably over a week later. And I wasn't in a coma,
mm-hmm.
but I just don't have any memory.
Sure.
But my next memory was probably a week and a half later, waking up when they were wheeling me in to do surgery to fix my collarbone and my shoulder that I had also broken. So I had what is called a subarachnoid hemorrhage and subdural hematoma. Most people that have that kind of injury are dead. I was very lucky in that they did not have to do any surgery or drilling into my head to release the pressure from the bleed in my brain. Because right as they were about to do that, basically it started sort of subsiding sufficiently on its own. So I didn't have to do any of that. A handful of riders, friends, whatever, that saw it, they said it was one of the craziest things, gnarliest crashes they've ever seen. And more than one person was like, yeah, I almost quit cycling after seeing that.
Wow.
Yeah. Alan Lim, my coach at the time, he was one of the first on the scene there with me, apparently. And yeah, he said it was pretty crazy scene. Yeah. Apparently I crashed, and then right away I got up and stood up or something. But then I fell over, and then I was out and had convulsions, and I
wow,
don't really even want to imagine it. I don't have any qualms about talking about it. I don't remember anything, so there's nothing that triggers some bad feeling about it or something.
And that's probably a very good thing,
right?
Totally.
I think it affected other people far more than me in terms of sort of post-traumatic stress or
sure,
trauma or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I was just oh, well, okay, this is how I am now, and what I have to do to move forward. But I don't remember exactly what happened. So there was nothing I was afraid of moving forward.
Well, let's go there. How did you move forward? What were the initial experiences that acute period where you're wrestling with the fact that this has happened to you, but also the rehabilitation?
Just let me back up. I was in the hospital for a couple weeks just resting, and then I had to have surgery for the shoulder and everything. And then I had to hang out another week before they would let me fly because of the pressure on my brain and everything. So I was there in Athens for 3 weeks or something. Finally got home, and then that was when things kind of started to become a little less foggy, and I could kind of start assessing what was going on and where I needed to go from there. And I started rehab at Craig Hospital at that point once I got back. So that's, world-class, nationally known brain and spinal cord trauma center.
In Denver.
Yeah. I was inpatient there, or outpatient rather. So I'd go there like 5 days a week, but I wasn't like staying there in the hospital or anything.
Well, that segues well into next question that I would have for you, which is getting into this identification of a concussion in an individual. And maybe we start by asking the question, are all concussions built the same? If a concussion is presented on the sideline of a football game, does that look like one at a soccer game or in a cycling event?
Yeah, so I think the biology of the injury is the same no matter the context. So certain amount of force is applied to the brain. We talked about the stretching of the neurons, the shifting of the ions within the neuron, and then this dysfunction that follows. So that biology is the same no matter the athletic setting. I think what changes is the context under which that happens. So within a cycling event, within a football event, within a soccer event, the psychology that the athlete brings with them. And then, as we touched upon, like kind of what's the sociology kind of around all of that. So the biology is the same, but how that athlete may internalize their symptoms or think about their symptoms, their resiliency around injury in general, what are they hearing from coaches and parents and their teammates, and then the culture that kind of surrounds all that may alter the way that they progress after the injury has occurred. I would even say, you could go so far as to say, even outside of the athletic context, that biology is the same of a slip on the ice, or somebody in a dorm room that wakes up too quickly and hits their head on the ceiling. That biology is the same, but it's all the things around it that may cause how it manifests and how it is managed and propagated to change.
One thing I found really interesting, certainly when you hear about concussions in the press, they're talking about the impact sports, so soccer, football, things like that. But so I'm looking at a study right now from 2019 looking at concussions. So they were trying to do a review of concussion research in cycling and bike races. And they looked at 94 studies. They only included 2 of them. One of them was a single case. The other was an opinion piece. So basically they said there has been almost no research in cycling. But then they had kind of a sobering line here, which is these statistics show that approximately 1.4 million persons are treated for TBIs annually in the U.S. And of these, an estimated 207,830 are related to sports and recreation. Cycling is reported to account for 40,424, or 19.45% of cases, the highest number in any sport.
Sobering, isn't it? I'll challenge some of their numbers. So broadly, what we cite for sport and recreation related injuries is 1.6 to 3.8 million per year. And partly why we cite that number is that somewhere around 50%, we don't know the real percentage here, but around 50% of injuries go unreported. So you can imagine, we've probably all seen it happen. You're at a weekend criterium, somebody crashes, they bang their head, they're like, I'm going to go home. And then by Monday, Tuesday, they feel okay. And they never see anybody. Never gets reported or documented anywhere. So the numbers are probably a little bit higher. The other thing is just about everybody in the United States learns to ride a bike at some point in their life. And if you look at the age at which concussions occur, you see a really high number in the kind of late single digit years, kind of still ticks up into the teen years. It flattens somewhere in the 20s and starts going back down, and it's pretty low, late 30s all the way through like the late 60s or so, and then it starts to go back up again. So at the early end of the age spectrum, you have kids learning to ride bikes, kids falling off of playground equipment, all those types of things. Then you get teenage, largely boys, men engaging in high-risk activities, so automobile accidents, contact sports, contact collision sports, those types of things. And then that obviously tapers off once college and the early 20s. Flattens out through our adult years and then goes back up in the 70s as older adults when we start having balance issues and start tripping on rugs and those types of things. And so we see another spike at the tail end of the lifespan. So that is the number, the percentage you cited, I think it goes close to 20%, is largely because of people learning to ride bikes. And I can just say, I learned to ride a bike probably late 70s, early 80s, no helmets. All right, we didn't wear helmets back then. It wasn't until I was a teenager we started wearing helmets. So that has, and I know we're going to talk about helmets later on because I think it's an important thing, but that in and of itself, just how we engage with safety equipment in the modern era is much different than it was. And even as I go through my town, I see a lot of kids without helmets, or probably as many of us remember as teenagers before driver's license was, I may wear my helmet out the door, but as soon as I get around the corner and mom and dad don't see me, it's like helmet comes off. Not cool,
right?
Which I do not recommend, of course. But so that explains the number, I think, that you just cited there.
I would also attribute this to the fact that this is a sport that a lot of people use for commuting, and I think when they were looking at those numbers, they were extending it beyond just participating as a sport. I think they were looking at a lot of commuters. There was another study that I looked at that we'll probably bring up at some point, looking at concussion in cyclists, and most of the cases of concussions they had were people getting hit by cars, somebody walking out in front of them on the bike path, things like that. And so sports like football, even they might have potentially a higher rate of concussion. I couldn't find anything on that, but you just don't have the volume of people participating in football that you have riding a bike.
Exactly. The percent of football, it depends on what you read, but it's somewhere in the 7 to, let's say, 10% per season.
Hannah Finchamp, a pro who races mountain bikes for the Orange Seal off-road team, has had a concussion as a cyclist. Sadly, her experience, being hit by a car, is not an isolated one in our sport.
I think it's tough. I think that I might have a little bit different perspective on this than many athletes because I am a certified athletic trainer. So concussion is something that, I learned about extensively in school. So for me, when I had my concussion, I was fully aware of what was going on, what needed to be done. But, on that note, I think that even as someone who knows exactly what's going on, who understands the risk of post-concussion syndrome and second impact syndrome and all of those things, it's still incredibly challenging as a professional athlete because this is what we do for a living. We ride our bikes for a living. So anything that takes us away from doing that is scary. And so it's very difficult, especially, when you first sustain the concussion, it makes sense. Okay, yes, I need to stay off the bike. But it's in those steps where, okay, you know what, now I'm feeling good, but I get on my bike and then I have symptoms. I think that time period is the most dangerous and the most difficult because as athletes, we're taught to push through pain. We're taught to push through discomfort. And when it comes to concussion, that is absolutely something you cannot do. And, concussion is the invisible injury. It's the one thing that really no one else can tell you whether you have it or not. There are specialists and there's all kinds of baseline tests and all these things that we can do that better our abilities. But, most of our diagnosis of concussion is signs and symptoms. And so as an athlete, you have to be really, really honest with yourself and others and doctors and whoever you're working with, and be open and vulnerable and say like, hey, here are the things that I'm experiencing.
Did having a concussion change you as an athlete in any way? Did you come back a different person or a different athlete?
For me, in terms of lasting symptoms, no. The concussion that I sustained was from getting hit by a car. So that experience as a whole certainly changed me, just because, I think, sadly, I think too many cyclists have been hit by cars. But for me, having that experience and coming out the other side safe, is a moment where I had to stop and remember, like, any day on the bike is a good day. Concussions are a functional disturbance of the brain that it alters ionic balance and metabolism. So I'm sure you guys know, it's not a bruise to the brain. It doesn't necessarily involve bleeding of the brain. It's none of these things that we can physically see. It's functional, not structural. So the best analogy I've ever heard is thinking of a snow globe. It's like when you shake the snow globe, everything inside gets all confused and fuzzy, but nothing breaks. And I don't know. I just love that analogy because I can picture our brain as that really fuzzy snow globe.
Let's get back to the cycling specifically then. What are the signs for cyclists to look for? They've had an accident on a training ride. They've hit their head. Their helmet isn't cracked. It's scuffed a little bit. How do they know if they have a concussion? How do they know if they should go see a doctor? When do they make that decision? Is it too late if it's been a couple weeks and then they start having symptoms? So this is maybe a complex question, but take it away, Dr. Broglio.
Yeah, it is a complex question. Thank you. So I would say, if you're out on a ride and you have the crash and, whether your helmet is scuffed or not, I think it is I don't feel right, I think, is the easiest way to say it. And that's assuming you're not a medical professional and can kind of be self-aware about it all. Clearly, if there's any loss of consciousness, or if you're with somebody and they crash and and I've seen this happen. I was in a race a number of years ago and guy crashed. I crashed into him, but he's like, "What happened?" And then you told him what happened, and then 2 minutes later, he's asking the same question: "What happened?" So repeating that same question again and again, going in and out of consciousness, declining mental status. We see a lot. Any sort of repetitive vomiting would be a pretty big red flag that you want to be worried about. But if you're alone, or really just if you have suspicion and concern, I would say go in. There is no harm in going in and then coming out to the physician saying, like, nothing to see here. And better to be checked and understand what's going on than not. Beyond that, I think from the medical provider standpoint, the provider's clinical exam and impression of the athlete is the gold standard for diagnosis. So I cannot put you in a scanner of any form. I cannot give you a specific computer test. I cannot give you a balance test and say with 100% certainty you have a concussion or you don't. It just doesn't work that way. Now there is, and this just happened last week, so I don't have a lot of information on it yet, but a company announced a blood test for concussion that supposedly is 90% accurate.
Wow.
But I haven't seen the data. I don't know anything about it. Like I said, it just happened last week. So I'm really curious as to what that's going to look like and how close to the time of injury you can get this blood test. How fast is the processing of the blood so you can get an answer. But I do think, we've been talking about this sort of thing for a long time in the research community that, blood biomarkers are probably the next frontier, and it seems like we're getting there. So it's very exciting, but I just don't have a lot of information I can share at this point because I just don't know.
But you do know that there are blood biomarkers that could indicate when somebody has a concussion. What do those things indicate? So really, this one, I believe, is a combination of two blood biomarkers. One is called GFAP and one is UCHL1. There's other blood biomarkers that people are interested in. But really it is, when we talked about that stretching of the neuron, it's released because of that stretching. And these markers come from various parts of the neuron. And so part of my questioning around, I don't know how fast or how close to the time of injury that can be used, is because if this marker is released within the brain, it has to cross out of the brain over the blood-brain barrier into the bloodstream and be in the blood in sufficient quantities that can be picked up on the panel. So that's why that may take some time, and I don't know the time frame that it occurs in, how sensitive the panels are, and those types of things. But
that's the kind of high level of what they're looking at. And people are looking at different markers all the time to try to understand, is there a single one that we can use that shows up in, really ideally it'd be, in seconds after injury. I'm not sure we'll ever get to that point, but people have looked at saliva, people have tried to look at urine, people have tried to look at sweat. There's a lot of people dedicating a lot of time and resources to try to figure this out, because I think the rapid and very accurate diagnosis is what we're all chasing. Seconds after injury, do some sort of test, have a yes or no answer. That's of course 100% perfect. So we can make a decision, because sport is very different. It's very different than walking into a physician's office 48 hours after the fact, and he or she has, half an hour to make a decision, or half an hour to do the exam and then 2 days to have a blood test run. Sport and cycling is very unique that, you got to make if you're in a team car and your rider goes down, you have to make a decision in seconds so they can get back on the bike and back into the caravan and then back with the group. So it just has a lot of challenges around it that you don't have in civilian life.
Well, that was something I was about to bring up, and that was the study that I was just quoting, which I should give the title. It's Sports-Related Concussion, SRC, Assessment in Road Cycling, a Systematic Review and Call to Action. They bring that up, that the cycling poses unique challenges that you don't see in other sports. So I'm sure you can talk more about this, but they bring up this SCAT-5 test for concussion and say, that's great if you're a football player where they can bench you for 5 to 10 minutes, do an analysis on you, and then decide to put you back in. But in a bike race, you've got 30 seconds or you've missed the field and you can't do the full analysis. So they actually, at the end of this paper, do a call to the UCI to say, if there's a danger of a concussion, you should do a full analysis. And then if they're cleared, actually drive them back to the field so that you can take the time. But what's your feeling about all this?
Yeah, so I had not seen that paper. I'm glad you highlighted that last sentence, because that's always been the challenge, right? Is giving the medical team enough time, roadside in our case, to do that evaluation. But then, how do you get the athlete back into the group? So, and right now, at least the way the current regulations work, I think as we all know, is, basically it's like get the athlete back on the bike as fast as possible. And then maybe let them hang on to the side of the medical car, if there is a medical car, and then kind of do it while you're rolling. But that poses all sorts of risks, because if the athlete is concussed, there's a really high chance they have impaired decision-making, impaired motor function. And if anybody's ever had to hang on to the side of a car at 100K an hour to get back into the group, like it's scary enough when it's normal, you're 100% healthy, and let alone if that athlete's impaired, you don't want them going down again. So I like that idea. I hadn't heard it before. I would encourage USA Cycling to think about it if they want, and obviously the UCI for that matter. The UCI did announce concussion protocol, I think it was late last year, which largely included the SCAT-5 that you mentioned, and I'll talk about it here in a second, but I don't recall anything about kind of allowing for a full roadside eval, and then basically, getting them back up to the group. The SCAT-5 is a product of the International Sport Concussion Group. It's essentially, which, full disclosure, I'm part of that group. We're not paid, we're just part of a scientific community. And really what it does is it combines the most common concussion assessment tools into a single packet, which is the SCAT tool. And then the 5 is just the 5th version. So within it, there are what they call a screening for red flags. So these are signs, symptoms from the athlete that would indicate that it's a medical emergency and they need to be transported. So after that, there's some orientation questions, but then it's basically a symptom screening, a mental status check, and then a balance and motor control exam. And then that's interpreted by the clinician and a decision is made. So the symptom checklist is exactly what you would think it is. Do you have a headache? And if you do, can you rate it for me, 0 to 6? Fatigue, nausea, vomiting. Does the light bother your eyes? Does noise bother you? When you get into the mental status screening, there's an orientation section. So do you know where you are? It's largely geared for contact sports or field sports. You can do what the score is, who we played last week. Then it gets into an immediate recall, so remembering a list of 5 words. Then there's a concentration section, so repeating a list of numbers in the reverse order they were given to you. And then there's a delayed recall. So the 5 words I gave you 2 minutes ago, can you repeat them back? In theory, all that can be done while you're hanging onto a car, driving down the road. But the one that couldn't be would be the motor portion. So that's a balance exam. And then there's like a heel-toe tandem gait type of test that goes with it. So that one would have to be dropped from cycling if it were to be implemented during a race. I do think that the SCAT could be used after an event. If there's a suspected injury, you could definitely do it after an event, whether it's just over the finish line or at the hotel afterwards. The nice part about it is it can be done in about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit long, a couple minutes longer, which not for roadside, that's not so good, but at a hotel or something. But it's free of charge. There's no cost to it. So one of the things that have been used over the last 2 decades are these computer-based tests, and they carry a pretty big cost. And the SCAT is as good, if not better, than the computer test, and it's free of charge. You just download the PDF and print it off, and off you go. So I think, we all know that cycling has a lot of funding issues, particularly at the non-pro level. And so teams that are looking for something that need something to use, I think it's a good alternative for them.
And on this SCAT-5, to be clear, I would assume you do not have to meet criteria for every single thing in there. There's a threshold you must reach. Is that correct?
Yeah, so each section is scored, but there's no composite score that's, I'm just going to make a number up, like, you cross below 60 and you have a concussion. So it's really up to the medical provider administering the test to say, oh, they have high symptom score, they have a really impaired motor function, and their mental status screening is really bad. So yes, she has a concussion. Or they're reporting high in the symptom, but they also just did a 200K race and 100-degree heat, and of course they're fatigued and they're grumpy, right? So that's where we say, like, the assessment itself doesn't give the diagnosis. It's up to the provider, because there's a lot of context that comes into all this. And so, or they have impaired motor function, but when they crash, they hurt their hip. And so they can't stand or walk as well as we would hope, or under normal circumstances. So that's why there's no cut score on these things to say, above the score is good, below the score is bad.
Well, it really sounds like, while you have an effective tool here, what's just as important is who's administering it. As you said, you could download the PDF, but I wonder if a lot of coaches would have the ability to take an athlete through this test and then say, yes, you have a concussion, or no, you don't. And I'm just thinking, I know what state I'm in 3-4 hours into a hard race. I think I'd fail 3/4 of this test, even if I didn't fall over.
Trevor likes to bury himself. He goes into cognitive debt at a certain point in a race.
Leave it all out there. So I'm glad you said that, because it is, I don't remember the exact language, but I'm pretty sure there's language on the form that said this is for medical providers only. And so unless the coach also happens to be an EMT, an athletic trainer, a physician, whatever, probably not appropriate. I would also just say that, the coach has got a conflict of interest. And that's not to say that they don't mean well in everything that they do, but they're there to win. That's their primary goal. And so then asking them to make a medical decision on a marquee player, a marquee athlete, or just not even any athlete for that matter, there's a conflict there. And I don't think I could endorse that.
Look, the athletes have conflicts too. I'm just picturing a cyclist who's 3 days into the Tour de France. They've spent their whole year getting ready for the tour, fall over, hit their head. They have a concussion. They don't want to pull out of the race. They're going to do everything possible to convince whoever's testing them that, I'm fine. Put me back in the race.
And I feel like that happened. I'm trying to remember. I may get the names wrong on this, but I feel like the story is something to the effect of, I think Boonen crashed early in one of his later tours, and I finished the stage and kept riding the next couple of days. But then I think it was Cancellara that basically called him out and was like, dude, you're a danger to everybody out here.
I think you actually have it right. I do remember a moment in time like that where the rider was sort of just not acting the right way in the peloton and becoming a danger, and Cancellara spoke up. And certainly the story that is maybe even more famous in a way is Chris Horner really knocking his head, getting back on the bike, finishing the stage, not really knowing where he was or what he was doing hours later after finishing the stage and all of that. So it's a complicated issue.
It's very, and the stage racing is a whole other level, right? Because if you don't finish today, you don't race tomorrow, and you don't always know in the moment roadside how that athlete is going to be. And we haven't talked about it. Concussion is an evolving injury. They may present fine when you pull up next to them and put the new wheels on or give them the new bike and send them on. And an hour later, they may have raging headache. So it is not, I think, as simple as it is often made out to be. It's not as clear cut for sure.
Timmy Duggan shares a bit more detail about the symptoms of his TBI as well as the initial steps he took to recover.
The difference between concussion and TBI is a significant one, but you had a relatively severe, if not very severe, TBI. Does that also mean you had a very, very severe concussion on top of that? How does that work from your point of view?
I mean, I would say some of the general or ultimate symptoms would be similar, but I think, again, I'm not a doctor or anything, but I would say the defining feature of my brain injury or a traumatic brain injury versus a concussion would be you've got some level of severe bleeding in your brain that was caused by your brain, like shearing against your skull, like spinning effectively in your skull.
Within the skull, yes.
Yeah. Some of the ultimate repercussions of a concussion or multiple concussions can be similar to some of the ultimate repercussions that maybe I'm dealing with or have dealt with. It was interesting, in the years later, talking to other people that had a brain injury or even just concussions or several concussions, like how similar at least some of the things were. It's like you can kind of relate to it even though you didn't have like the exact same injury or even close to the same injury. But right. A lot of the sort of ultimate repercussions can be pretty similar.
Can you take us inside what some of those symptoms are?
So initially, I didn't have any problems with like balance and coordination, which I think you would sort of imagine would be sort of a standard thing when you hit your head that hard. Like I didn't have any problems with that. Like I think the first day of rehab at Craig, I was literally on one of those balance boards and juggling 3 balls and reciting every third word of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Wow. I don't know if I could do that in normal times.
Right. So I was like, see, I'm fine, but then other things were just totally off the scale, like my kind of spatial reasoning and ability to sort of plan things and some emotional stuff, like all of that was, really messed up, even if my vision, coordination, balance, all that stuff was totally fine. So it's definitely interesting to talk to other people who have any level of head injury, and the symptoms are just, there's just no rhyme or reason. It's just so individual, per person. Mm-hmm. You talk to somebody else that has a similar or even less severe injury, and they might have long-term, balance and coordination or vision issues. And, I had this injury that almost killed me, and like I never had anything on that side of things.
That's wild.
Yeah.
One of the things that I know I want you to talk about today is something you mentioned to me when we were setting up this interview, which is the fact that you could meet with 1,000 specialists that have studied, each of them has studied 1,000 different cases of TBI or concussion or whatever, but they can never really understand what it's like for you to go through it as you did.
Right.
Tell me about that experience, the friends that reached out to you or the people that you reached out to help you understand what it was going to be like for you, and how important that was.
Probably kind of the initial sort of big shocker I had in coming back was in working with my neurologist, neuroscientist brain surgeon guy at Craig. I mean, he's absolutely world-class, best of the best. He was really pessimistic about not necessarily my outcome, but he was like, dude, you should not race a bike ever again. Like, bad idea. Because, if you hit your head again, you could, we don't know, it could be a vegetable. Or you could be totally fine. But, in his professional opinion, he thought racing again for me, and even just riding a bike, was going to be too risky. And I didn't like hearing that, so I didn't really listen to that.
I can understand that.
But that sort of set off in me just like, okay, not that the doctors are against me or whatever, but it's just they don't know, For one, they don't know like deep down what I'm feeling, what I'm going through, but literally they don't know like what will happen if you hit your head again, or what will happen if you do XYZ. Like
they could speculate, but they couldn't tell you
exactly. So I mean, it's not like you don't want to listen to them. You want to listen to their very professional opinion and take that into account. But then you weigh that against the risks or pros and cons, and you make your own decision. And you really do have to take ownership of your care and your treatment, and just go the direction you want to go. Because if you just listen to everybody else, and especially on the medical side, which is going to obviously be very conservative, you're not going to do anything. You're going to, play it safe and just sit there, and you're not going to hit your head at 60 miles an hour on the pavement ever again. But there's a whole lot of cons that comes with, quitting your previous career, or not being healthy from an athletic standpoint anymore. It just, you really kind of have to take charge yourself, which was really scary at that time, when there's just so many unknowns, and like all this is like new. Like, I don't know how to come back from a brain injury, and all these people are telling me this and that and this and that, and none of it is what I want to hear or what I agree with maybe. And you kind of have to like forge your own path.
And for those who don't know your story, you did come back to racing.
Yeah.
And you won a national title.
Yeah, I had some.
So you can do these things that maybe doctors said you shouldn't do.
Exactly. And again, like, it's their job to play it safe and be conservative, and I get it. But it's my job as an athlete to not do that. So that was April of 2008. It was the week before I was supposed to start the Giro d'Italia, so that was kind of a bummer timing. My team went on to win the team time trial that year, and would have been something pretty cool to be a part of. Yeah, so that was April. Basically didn't do anything physical for a few months, and then just slowly started getting back into it, riding the trainer. Eventually by the end of the year, I was riding outside, but just very carefully. And it was just weird because I felt totally fine.
Was there anything inside of you that was like, I hope I don't do these first set of intervals and have an aneurysm or something because of the damage that's in there? Was there any part of you that had that anxiety?
No, I wasn't afraid of that. And that was, one of their concerns of getting back to exercise too soon, the blood pressure and everything on the brain, in addition to the risk of crashing on your head again. Both those were the kind of the main concerns with getting back to exercise and risk too soon or ever. But yeah, I just took it easy, step by step. And if anything, looking back, I probably could have been even more aggressive with things.
You didn't race until was it the following season?
Oh yeah, then I was at Tour Down Under the next season. In January was my next
So
race.
It was less than 12 months that you went from hospital bed and severe brain injury to racing again.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that next year, training camp, getting to the start of the season, it was like getting blasted by the fire hose the whole time. It's like, whoa, I've been basically doing nothing for 9 months, and then like, here you go, back in it. I mean, that was definitely a bigger challenge, just physically kind of readapting to all that and kind of learning how my body operated a little bit differently at those intensities, and most of all, just like how my brain operated like within the race. And I really had to go through a period of, that first few months of the season of sort of going through all emotions and kind of reliving all these situations where it's, maybe it's like we get into a crosswind section. It's like, how do I approach that mentally? And the first few months of that season, maybe I'd be more hesitant to just like dive into where I need to go or hold the wheel or whatever. And so I would go through all these situations and sort of f it up, make a mistake. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember how I approached this mentally before. And then the next time it would be there again. Yeah. It's kind of like I had to relearn a lot of things that had become automatic or instinctual. But it didn't take much. I mean, I just had to kind of relive all those things like once or twice, and then it was kind of ingrained in me again,
Earlier in the show, Dr. Broglio, you said that things will resolve when it comes to concussion. You stated 50% will resolve in 2 weeks, 90% will resolve in a month. That leaves 10% that are unresolved after a month. But what are the potential long-term repercussions of concussion?
Like I mentioned, I think from a single or maybe two even concussions, I wouldn't personally have any real concerns about long-term effects. So I'll kind of split your question up into two parts. I think the 10% that don't recover within the 4-week window, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I feel like another 5% recover within the next month, and then maybe another 2% the month after that or something. And so it starts to taper down. There are certainly people, and you see the news stories about them, that they have a single injury and they have persistent headache for however long, a year later, let's say. And my personal belief is that anything that extends beyond a month, maybe 2 months, the biology of the injury is healed by that point and something else is going on. So for example, you may have an athlete that has a concussion, 2 months later, they continue to complain of headaches. That may be related to a neck injury that happened concurrently with the concussion. So imagine a lot of force to the head, the neck is attached to the head as it turns out. And so there may be something that it got out of alignment and you can actually have a headache that starts from a misalignment in the neck. Or they may have ongoing dizziness, same time frame, and maybe it was a vestibular injury that occurred simultaneous with the concussion. So as athletes start getting around that 1 month period, if they aren't showing good progress, I'm not going to say they have to be absolutely recovered, but if they aren't showing good progress towards recovery, then that's probably the time. You could even go in earlier, but I would say by 1 month for sure, you want to go in and go see somebody and say, hey, like this, maybe something else is going on here. What are our options? And can we get somebody else involved? The other thing is, as we go through the management process, even early on, the theory about about 10 years ago was that the injury happens, shut the athlete down, put them in a dark closet, turn the lights off, don't let them out until all the symptoms go away. And really what we found was that when that happens, that athlete feels isolated, they're removed from their team, they're removed from school if they're a student athlete. And the psychology, we talked about this earlier, the psychology starts to overlay with the injury. So as the concussion symptoms start to wind down, the biology induced symptoms starts to wind down, the psychological symptoms start to wind up. And disentangling those two actually becomes a problem. The other thing is, particularly with high-level athletes, is that they like to work out. And if they don't work out, they don't feel right. And so what we're seeing and what we're learning is that, yes, you probably need to shut somebody down for 24, 48, maybe 72 hours. But after that point, you want them to start doing a little bit of activity. Now, a little bit of activity is not 200K with 2 on, 2 off 10 times over. So a little bit of activity is go for a walk around the block, right? And if that feels okay, then tomorrow, maybe a little bit longer walk, or maybe we put the bike on the trainer, not the rollers, but the trainer where it's bolted in, and just turn the pedals over super light, and let's see how this goes. And then it's just kind of the gradual progression as we move, increasing intensity and duration to get back into. And there's actually really good evidence that's come out of Buffalo. John Leddy and his team they've been doing this work for a long time, and they're really the first ones to show that exercise as a therapeutic modality really works well for this group of people, both in the short term, that kind of initial recovery period, but then also these individuals that have ongoing symptoms at a month, like getting somebody back on their bike or getting them back to their sport in general in a safe environment. I'm not recommending like, hey, football athlete, you have ongoing symptoms at 1 month, let's throw you back into a game. That's not what I'm saying. But get them back engaged with some physical activity. It really works well for a lot of people. They respond really well to it, and it brings those symptoms back down to normal levels. So that's kind of like, let's call that kind of the immediate. We have the acute stage, let's say time point 0 out to 1 month. Then we get this intermediate stage, 1 month out. Then the bigger question is long-term, and by long-term, like years, decades later. So this idea of long-term effects around concussion or mild TBI, it was first put into the literature right around the turn of the 20th century. I think the first paper was 1928 or something. And it came out of the boxing community. So the idea of the punch drunk, which I think a lot of people have heard of, or dementia pugilistica, I think people have heard that phrase as well. And really what they noted, there's a researcher in New Jersey, Harrison Martland, that first identified this, is it was hand tremor and some impaired cognitive function in these boxers that had a high number of fights and a high number of knockouts, which would just lead you to believe that they lost a lot. And so that was kind of the first reported case. Then kind of moving forward, there were various research articles that kind of were sporadic in the literature, but not until 2005 or 2006, when the first modern CTE case, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, was identified by Ben Ndumalu in Pittsburgh when he did the autopsy on Mike Webster, the former Pittsburgh Steelers lineman. The idea here is that concussion, and now what we think is head impact without concussion, causes the tau proteins that are in the brain. And tau is a naturally occurring substance in the brain. It breaks loose. It gets a bunch of phosphate molecules attached to it, and it gets really sticky, and then it deposits. And so I'm sure a lot of people have seen the brain slices where you'll see this kind of like pinkish yellow healthy brain tissue, and then you see these like dark brown black spots. And it's those dark brown black spots that are the tau deposits. And the idea is that these things build up and they cause cognitive impairment, impaired motor function, kind of depending on where it lays down in the brain. And that's the thing that I think has drawn the idea of CTE or modern CTE. That's what's drawn the most attention to concussion. It's what the movie was based on, that first case. And I think that's where people are concerned about long-term effects. But like I said, this is not something, you do not get brain-wide tau deposits from 1 to concussions. These individuals that have these high levels of tau are typically most heavily researched are the former NFL players. So they have decades of exposure to concussion, to head impacts without concussion that causes this. The other thing I will say is it is not clear by any stretch of the imagination how many people will get this and why. So if you look at all NFL players, some will end up with CTE and will have cognitive impairment. That's definitely a thing, but it is very clear it is not all of them. And NFL players live longer than the average population. They have lower all-cause mortality than the general population. So they have fewer cancer deaths and fewer heart attacks and all those types of things. So it is not as simple as you played football, you're going to get CTE, or you had a concussion, you're going to get CTE. We really are this was just identified in 2005, 2006. So we're 10 or 15 years into this, and in the scientific world, we're like just at the beginning of trying to understand who and why this happens.
So bringing this back to cycling, so here was another thing that caught me by surprise. Here's you'd probably know these people, a study that was just published this year out of Toronto, looking at the post-concussion syndrome in adult cyclists, and basically said we're pretty sure we're the first study on looking at the long-term effects of concussion in cyclists. And it was encouraging to hear you give the timeline that you gave, because this study was a little more pessimistic. So they said the same thing, that approximately 80 to 90% of concussions are short-term, with symptoms dissipating within about 28 days of injury. But in that 10 to 20% that get the post-concussion syndrome, they were saying that there's a greater mean duration of about 23.7 months. But their definition was even if just a single symptom is maintained. So, for example, headache, fatigue, sleep disturbance, anxiety. So it's interesting you say, well, that might not actually be the concussion. It could be other effects.
Yeah, and so I don't know that study, and so I don't want to be critical. I would just say that there is definitely, and there's research on this. Grant Iverson, who's at Harvard, has done some of this work, and what he terms it's the good old days bias. So basically, I never had one symptom in my entire life before this injury occurred, and now because of this injury, I have all these symptoms.
Right.
Which we all know is not true. So I don't want to. This paper you just cited may be 100% accurate, and so I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying, as an alternative explanation, there may be some recall bias in their participants.
Yeah. Well, I was about to say, I was reading their whole list of symptoms, and I just went, well, I think even though I've never had a concussion, I have post-concussion syndrome because I have a lot of those symptoms every day.
Yeah. As it turned out, when I woke up on Tuesday morning, I was fatigued and had a headache, but my birthday was Monday night, so that might have explained it. So.
Happy birthday.
Thanks.
Learning from others who have gone through a similar trauma can be comforting and cathartic. And this is something Timmy found to be true in the aftermath of his crash.
I definitely, it's not that I wouldn't take as much risk anymore, but I definitely would take more calculated risks, like if it's on a descent at 60 miles an hour, or diving into a corner. I was just more aware of, like, does this really matter that much right now? And if it did, then yeah, I would take that risk and I wouldn't hesitate and it would be fine. But I just wouldn't take stupid risks. I was more aware of that level, that kind of difference.
Do you think that being the caliber of athlete that you were at that time helped you recover at the rate that you did? Was it a double-edged sword, the fact that you wanted to get back to that level so quickly that was the risk?
I mean, like, so many injuries and ailments and sicknesses, like a big predictor of how well you're going to recover is how healthy you were in the first place, right? So yeah, I was obviously healthy, physically very strong, mentally very strong. Sort of the mental side of things is something I always devoted a lot of focus and attention on throughout my career. And so that was a huge tool, like, moving forward, working with the psychologist that I'd always worked with and being able to kind of break things down and take things step by step, moving forward from there, especially in this case where it came to, just dealing with sort of handling negativity and all the, there's a lot of stuff pushing back on me as I was recovering. And I didn't really have any, like, breakthroughs for a while. It was just sort of like, kind of felt like I was just banging my head against a wall for a long time. So just still being strong through that and having faith through that,
Other question I had for you was about the maybe the chronic effects of this. Are you a different person now because of this? And will you forever be a different person because of this in some ways?
A few things changed. My wife could probably chime in on this better than I could. Probably the biggest thing, and actually a helpful thing that happened, was I became just, like, hyper aware of how much energy my brain was using. I think when you're healthy and everything's fine, like, you don't consider the toll that mental energy or stress or whatever takes on your brain and your body as a whole. And when I was super compromised as I was recovering, I realized, like, geez, even, like, going out to the grocery store and running an errand and just the stimulus, or like going to some little event and having to talk to 6 people, just how much energy that took, and I'd come home and I'd just be exhausted, and obviously that became better and better as time progressed, and I could,
But you're aware of that now, which
right.
A lot of us probably take it for granted that we don't even take it into consideration when we're thinking about the stress that we're going through or putting ourselves under.
Exactly. And, at that time, obviously the big focus of my life is racing. What really helped me in bike racing and in the race itself was I started thinking of things in terms of managing my mental energy, even more so than my physical energy, like say you've got this 5-hour long race, and I found it was more taxing on me to be like maybe fighting for position all the time. That's taking mental energy, even if that's saving you physical energy because you're just in better position, right? But if you're fighting all the time and just stressing on the whole race or whatever, then when it is time to like really be there and be at your best, like you might be just so fried mentally, you don't want to fight anymore at the point where it actually matters, you know? So I really sort of compartmentalized the race into sections where I was really on or sections where I was off. And then that way I could sort of have the confidence that, okay, I'm turning my brain off for a little bit because I got some chill time here. I'm not going to fight for position. I'm just going to chill wherever I end up. That's great. But I'll tell you what, at 35K to go, when we get to whatever little town, it's freaking go time. And I would like owe that to myself for sort of taking that rest and have the confidence like, okay, I've been chilling this last hour mentally, so I've got no excuses but to just be totally on it when it matters, you know? So yeah, just being hyper aware of just my mental energy within the race, I think really helped me.
What about memory issues? Do they linger or anything like that?
Even now, just, remembering small details. Again, like I joke, but it's partially true. Maybe it's just an excuse. I don't know. But I do feel like I have a limited brain capacity. I mean, like all of us, right? But I'm just aware of what that is, and I'm aware of what happens when my brain gets too full of non-important things and I start screwing up, I start making mistakes. So I just can't process like all this useless information that's always coming at us.
This sounds like a good thing in a lot of ways. Yeah. To have that awareness. Totally.
And like in my career now in real estate, I think it really helps me filter down what matters and what doesn't. And I am extremely forward with people. I know you like to communicate with these really long text messages or emails, or you like to talk a lot and blah, 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 but I'm not going to like read it all because I just can't process all that. So if there's something you really need me to know, or you really want me to do, like make sure that's very, very clear. Cause I just can't sort through all this stuff, you know? Yeah. Just how you set up your life and structure your life and how you keep organized. That's still something I really have to pay attention to and manage even now. Years later, just staying organized and keeping things simple, because again, it's just really easy for me to sort of get disorganized. So I structure my all my systems around making that easy for me, and like the team I work with in real estate now, having certain things delegated to others so I can focus on what I need to do and not letting it get like all mixed up,
I don't know if anybody has come to you that has had a TBI in their life, or if you wanted to speak to those out there that are listening, but what would you say to somebody if they do come to you, or if they're listening?
Yeah, and kind of back to when we were talking about, I kind of trailed off on something else. That's another thing. Like I get kind of distracted pretty easily, and I forget what I was talking about in the first place. Again, like it's not like nobody else has that problem, but it's just something I'm hyper aware of, and I think is pretty different with me. But yeah, we were talking about the neurologist I was working with, and he was pretty pessimistic about, what I should be doing moving forward. And yeah, kind of the biggest challenge I found was, it was easy to find information and stories of people that had some significant brain injury in a car accident or whatever, and it took them this many years and they did X, Y, and Z, and now they're back working at the desk selling insurance or something. Like that's great and all, but as an elite athlete, you need that last 2-3%. Whereas if you're kind of a regular person, you're not even going to notice maybe that you're missing even 10% maybe, because you're not just on the limit physically and mentally, like you are as an athlete. And just because of sheer numbers, I mean, there's just not that much data or information or stories out there from other athletes who have maybe had a similar incident or a similar injury, and then, you know, it's a public story, or you have a way to get in touch with them and talk to them about it. So that was like the biggest challenge for sure that I had. It was just like, okay, like I'm 90% there, but like, how do I get the rest of the way? And there's like, nobody can tell me. The doctors can't really tell me. And by far the most helpful thing I found was just talking to other athletes that had gone through something similar. And again, it's not going to be the same thing. No two athletes are going to have the same experience, but hearing their stories and being empathetic with them, it's like, oh yeah, I totally feel that too. I talked to a couple of ski racing athletes quite a bit. That's my kind of initial background, is from alpine ski racing. So I'm still have a foot in the door in that world. One athlete, Scott McCartney, on the US ski team, he had an unbelievable crash in the Kitzbühel downhill maybe 2 years before my crash. I mean, just Google it; it'll be all over the internet. And he was in bad shape for a while, and he was ultimately able to come back, be on the World Cup for a few more years before he ultimately moved on to other things. But talked to him quite a bit on the phone, and he was super helpful, kind of sharing his experience, even though his recovery and the injury itself were really not at all like mine whatsoever. Like, he had kind of the whole opposite sort of range of symptoms that I did. So it's hard to relate to, his experience specifically, but it was helpful. I talked to another US ski team athlete that I had become friends with long after my recovery. I mean, this was like 2014, 15. So I retired from the sport at that point. And she had a significant crash ski racing and training in 2007, I believe. Very similar injury. And talking to her a bunch, I found out she had, very similar symptoms. So that was really cool to relate to her on that. And one thing that was kind of life-changing in, hearing her story and her sharing everything with me was, at that time I was really struggling with a sort of undiagnosed depression and some other things I didn't even know was like wrong. But she was telling me about how, she was feeling really similar and was in a pretty dark place, but she started trying to find a right like medication combo to manage that mental health issue. And she was like, yeah, I finally found the right combo with my doctor, and it was like the fog like lifted, and like this and this was better. And I'm just like, what? Like I hadn't even considered that. And a doctor never really pushed that on me, like doing the medication route. And it's also something like, I'm like this badass tough athlete. Like, I don't need to like take drugs to make my brain feel better. Like, I'll just figure it out,
Endurance athlete mentality of just pushing through. I can do this on my own, right?
And I'm super aware and work on my mental state all the time. And it'll be fine. So it didn't even cross my mind. And I wish a doctor had pushed that on me more to sort of try out, because it is true that depression is like a huge, very common symptom of traumatic brain injury survivors, just because like in my case, my brain's ability to make endorphins and all that kind of stuff is really limited. Literally is like a chemical imbalance. It's not just something you can just talk about and like tough it through,
Right.
But anyway, she was telling me about what a great experience she had, like finally figuring out the right medication. And I kind of blew my mind. Like, what? You're like this badass stoic athlete, and like you have to take happy pills to like make it all better? All right, I'll give that a shot. I mean, I trust you. So I did, and figured it out with my doctor, and same freaking thing, man. Like the fog lifted, and like my life was like totally different from that point on, from managing like the depression. And kind of another big thing that I didn't really realize while I was racing, but in retrospect it makes total sense. But my injury also kind of gave me a good bit of like ADHD, like hence how I'm still can get distracted or lose track of things fairly easily. But that is hugely managed now with like the medication that I take. And yeah, looking back, it was like, I used to be one of the best time trialists in the country. And after my head injury, I can't think of a single time trial result I ever had the rest of my career that I was like proud of. Like, oh yeah, I was good. I rode to my
take focus, and you just didn't have it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I always thought it was like a physical thing, like, oh, my ability to do whatever lactate threshold something was limited. But yeah, it was absolutely more of a focus thing. So anyways, the moral of all that story is, in addition to like sharing my story about my head injury, also sharing that like there's no shame in like going the medication route if you need to, whether that's because of the head injury or because of whatever other mental health route or mental health issue. I mean, it makes a huge, like life-changing, in my case, difference.
When you go beyond concussion, what are the signs that it's more than just I shouldn't say just a concussion, because these can change people's lives, at least in a short term.
We talked about this earlier, where TBI broadly is bucketed into mild traumatic, moderate, and severe brain injury. And from a clinical standpoint, the way we think, there's a clinical rating scale called the Glasgow Coma Scale, where depending on your score, you get bucketed into one of these three groups. So mild traumatic brain injury concussion is 13, 14, 15, so the highest possible scores. Moderate and severe obviously fall below that, and they're largely based on duration of loss of consciousness and amnesia, length of amnesia, and things of that nature. That's from the clinical standpoint. So if you just were to talk to a medical provider, if that's how it would be evaluated. So the Glasgow Coma Scale was invented before MRI and CT were available. Couldn't do it. In the modern era, and I'm not aware of classification systems, but the way I think about it is anything that shows up on a CT scan as a structural injury to the brain tissue, then you get automatically bucketed into moderate or severe, depending on how severe the severe is. And so when we talk about long-term effects of moderate and severe brain injury, we're talking about somebody that had structural change to their brain. Not we talk about concussion or mild traumatic brain injury as a functional change, right? So it's like the software is not working well, but we can reboot. Now we're talking about structural change. The hardware itself has changed. And depending on the magnitude of that change, the brain may or may not be able to compensate for it. So the brain is amazingly plastic. Like, it can recover from all sorts of things. There's redundancy, and it can handle a lot of injury, insult and injury. But there's a point when it can't do it. And so some people, depending on where the injury has occurred and the extent of that injury, they just may have persistent effects that just go on. They may see some degree of improvement, but they may never get back to where they were.
When somebody you say structural changes must take place. If there's bleeding on the brain, does that naturally indicate that there has been a structural change, or is that a gray area here?
We're getting a little bit out of my area, since everything I deal with has no bleeding and no structural damage. So I'm just going to give opinion at this point, and not any. If one of your listeners wants to phone in or write in and correct me, I'll be very humble and agree with them. But if you have bleeding, then there was structural damage, right? A vessel was ruptured, and so there's damage there. Now that bleeding, depending on where it occurs, it can be handled in a way that there's no long-term damage. And so if you have bleeding kind of on the very periphery of the brain, the space between the brain and the skull, you can, not to be too graphic here, but you can drill into the skull, or remove a section of the skull and relieve that pressure, stop the bleeding, and then depending on how fast it happens and other things are involved, there may be a very positive outcome. If it is deeper in the brain, can't get to it, or it is so severe, there may be more permanent consequences that come with that.
strangely, from my point of view, some people think that helmets don't help. But let's talk about helmets specifically. Do they help? How do they help? And I don't know if you can speak to this, but where are the shortcomings of cycling specifically here?
So helmets for sure help, and they help on many levels. So I mean, we touched on this. I grew up learning to ride a bike without a helmet. I don't think I put one on until my teen years. I remember I never wore a hairnet, but I had friends that wore them, so kind of dates me a bit.
And Jana, our producer, is looking at us like, why would the man be wearing a hairnet? That's the style of a helmet from yesteryear. It wasn't actually a hairnet.
Watch American Flyers.
Yeah,
we've already told you have to watch American Flyers.
Yeah.
Right.
It was basically like 4 pieces of very thin padding, essentially. I don't know that it did all that much, right?
They were. I think they were more for abrasion than they were for.
Right.
Helmets initially were not designed for concussion. Helmets were designed to prevent skull fracture, and I'm going to bounce back and forth here, but within the football context, they are really good at that, at preventing skull fracture. And largely they were invented or designed to prevent skull fracture because that's what people were worried about. They were worried about skull fracture and moderate severe TBI because, as I said before, people weren't largely concerned about concussion. Then as there was concern around concussion, newer technologies started being invented to help dissipate some of those forces that we see kind of at the lower end that cause concussion. So, technologies, the MIPS technology, the wave cell technology, that is specifically designed to try to mitigate forces that can cause concussion. And the data would suggest that they do that. Definitely the newer football helmets, there's very clear data that the newer football helmets are better than the old ones, and concussion rates are down because of that. There will never be a helmet that is 100% concussion resistant or concussion proof, or whatever term you want to use. It just will not happen, just based on the way we are designed as human beings. The brain sits inside the skull. There's a little bit of fluid around the brain that kind of cushions it in some level, but we can't stabilize the brain directly. So there's just no way we'll ever develop a concussion-proof helmet. But the technologies will get better and help mitigate more and more of these forces. But the new helmets are good. They definitely help. And I would tell everybody to wear one under all circumstances. I'm not immune to riding through town and asking people where their helmets are. I'm not gonna say I do it a lot, but I have done it. So, because it to me in this day and age, it's a little ridiculous that you're not wearing a helmet. And I would say a massive pet peeve of mine is you'll see a family out riding, the kid or kids will have helmets on and then mom and dad don't. And apparently gravity doesn't affect the parents the same way it affects the kids. So I've been known to make a comment or two audibly.
I admit I was surprised by this. So first of all, I'll say, getting ready for this episode, I started to do my research on concussion and just went, this is such a complex subject. I'm glad we have a good expert, because I can't even pretend to be an expert on concussion. So I just focused on the research looking at cycling specifically in concussion. And obviously a lot of helmet research came up. And I went into it with that mindset of, yeah, the helmet will prevent fracture, as you said, but it can't do much for concussion, because that's your brain moving around inside the skull. And it really sounds like that's a myth that I was believing that's a myth. And so I'm looking at one study right now. So it looked at the effects of a helmet versus non-helmeted head and said this resulted in a reduction of the risk of concussion of up to 54%. The stress to the skull bone went from a fracture level of 80 MPa down to 13 to 16 MPa when a helmet was included, and the skull fracture risk was reduced by up to 98%. There was also another study out of England, or Great Britain, that looked at 11,192 patients who had been in some sort of cycling accident that had been reported at the trauma units. And showed that patients who wore helmets, so it says here, cycling helmet use was also associated with a reduction in severe traumatic brain injury, 19.1% versus 47.6%. So I was actually quite surprised the difference a helmet can make.
Dr. Broglio, I don't know if you can speak to the different technologies, but I think that some of them are an attempt to reduce these shearing forces and some of these things. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
I'll just put in a picture real quick, just since we're talking about helmets. In particular, too, so all helmets have to pass a national standard in order to be certified and put into the marketplace. So anybody buying an off-the-shelf helmet, like, it's going to meet this minimum scoring or testing. I think for people that are interested in finding the most concussion-resistant helmet, I would encourage them to go look at the work being done at Virginia Tech. So Stefan Duma and Steve Ralston, they developed the STAR rating system, and they started with football, and they've gone into other sports, but they do cycling helmets. They evaluate cycling helmets, and they will test and rate cycling helmets based on their ability to mitigate the forces associated with concussion.
This is kind of like a JD Power rating for crash testing in vehicles. They get a STAR rating, correct?
Exactly. And so really they get it for more scientific inquiry and knowledge development, but really what it's done is it's driven the industry, because everybody wants to be the top of the list, and that causes people to innovate and get better. And we saw this with Trek and the wave cell, and I'm aware of other things that are going on around wave cell right now, but they were trying to innovate and be better and do better than MIPS, which came before them, and somebody will come out with something better than that. And that's that type of indirect pressure on the industry will make these things get better. But back to your question, so largely we can think of kind of the forces of acting on the head and the brain kind of in two large buckets, and one of these linear forces, so that's just force applied really straight through the center of mass of the brain, so just in a straight line. The other are these rotational acceleration or rotational forces that are occurring. And this is more of the twisting and the shearing that happens with impact. And neither one of them occur in isolation of the other. They always occur in parallel with each other. They're really highly correlated for that matter. You'll sometimes hear that it's 98 Gs of linear acceleration is most likely to cause concussion. There's no threshold concussion, as it turns out. We spent 10 years trying to find one, we couldn't do it. And but it's very easy when we talk to people. It's very easy for someone to conceptualize 98 Gs as opposed to 5,500 grads. So we talk about linear just because conceptually it's easier, and the correlation between the two, linear and rotational, is pretty tight. But those are the two. And so the traditional helmets were largely built around our understanding of linear acceleration and its work on the brain, or influence on the brain. The newer technology, MIPS, wave cell, and others, that's largely around rotational and trying to mitigate some of those rotational acceleration, or the rotational acceleration that occurs after impact. And so that's the difference, is they've kind of started addressing this other component of the impact that results in injury.
Could you explain what those rotational forces are? It's essentially the helmet contacting the ground, and then the brain rotating within the skull, which would lead to the neuron stretching and so forth. Is that correct?
Exactly. So there's some data to suggest that it's the rotational component of the injury that actually causes the injury, and the linear. If you could have a pure linear impact, it wouldn't do anything, or you would end up with a skull fracture before anything else would happen. So it's that rotational, which the brain is fixed at the bottom through the stem, at the brain stem, and so. You can imagine this kind of, the head is sloshing inside of the skull with the base fixed. I don't know if you can see my hands, but it twists, it rotates. And that's what causes the neurons to stretch. And then we talked about the ion change that happens from that. So if you can reduce the amount that it rotates, that rotational acceleration, then you can reduce the risk for injury.
Let's go back to Timmy one last time. Looking back on his experience, there are some things he would have done differently.
Like I was saying, I was, coming back in the 2009 season, just kind of back in the deep end, training camp, Tour Down Under, and then it was just full on in Europe from there. And the whole time I just felt like I was beating my head against the wall, and racing was going okay. I was doing my job as a domestique, and it was okay. Like I was performing okay. It wasn't terrible, and I felt okay, but I didn't feel great, and that's just kind of always how it was. And by mid-season, by June, I was just over it. I'm like, this is going nowhere. This sucks. I feel like ass all the time. I can't do this anymore. I don't know. So then we're at the Dauphiné, and again, that race is going well, doing my job. Like every day is just so hard. I'm just like dying, but I'm like doing my job. It's fine, but it just sucks so badly. Day before the last stage, I'm just like, yeah, screw this. I'm done. Tomorrow literally is going to be my last day of racing, and I'm going to quit. I'm going to go back to school, get my real estate license, whatever. I was thinking of moving on. And, I remember just being fully committed to that the night before stage 9 or whatever. And then on the bus, the way to the race, I was just totally checked out. And I think I almost missed sign in. Maybe I didn't sign in. I don't know. Line up at the race, and then again, I'm doing my job, covering breaks and the covering moves in the first part of the race, and I find myself in this like 30-man split that ends up getting some big time, and the whole time I'm just like sitting on the back waiting to get dropped, basically. And we're just rolling, and blah blah blah. 20K to go. We're coming into the last climb. It's like this Cat 1 climb in the Alps, and then descend, and then flat to the finish real quick. And we start going up the climb, and again, I'm just waiting to get dropped. And then we're going up in that first kilometer, and like guys are just like going backwards everywhere. I mean, and there's some serious firepower in this move too. And before I knew it, I was like on the front without even trying. I'm like, and it was like this weird, surreal experience of I literally thought something was like wrong with the world. Like, how is this happening? Like, Oscar Pereiro is like dropped. Like, what's going on? Well, I guess I might as well attack. I was the only guy from my team in the move. So I just lit it up, and only one guy could stay with me. Eventually, he caught me like just at the top. And then the two of us like ripped down the descent, time trial to the finish, and we're sprinting for the win on stage, the last stage of the Dauphiné. And literally at the 200 meters to go, I was like waiting for the peloton to just like catch up. Like, no way is this happening.
Yeah.
And I freaking didn't win the sprint. I got second by like a tire width.
Almost a perfect ending.
Yeah. But yeah, that would have been a big win. But I mean, at that time, that was as good as a win for me, because it was like in one day, like right after I had literally quit, in my mind, like everything changed. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, maybe
this
I
is
can
what
do
bike
this.
racing is about.
Yeah, like that was literally my best result of my career, and I felt amazing. So maybe it's not over. And then the rest of the season just went, took off from there, because that mental switch was flipped, So yeah, from there on, it was kind of a lot easier to, focus ahead and move forward, and not be feeling like, my injury was holding me back anymore.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's a great story. I don't remember that.
Yeah. and again,
that was, you said 2009, that would have been?
2009.
Yeah.
And yeah, I raced for 5 more years, and kept getting better and better results. And so yeah, on the outside and on paper, like everything was getting better and better for Timmy Duggan, my career was progressing. I was riding for amazing teams, but like internally, inside my head, it was just getting worse and worse. I was more and more miserable. I just freaking hated it. I was super depressed, but didn't realize it. And ultimately, that feeling is what led me to retire and move on. Everything was going so well, riding for the best teams, making more money than I ever had, having the better results than I ever had, but I was still just miserable. So I thought quitting cycling was going to be the fix to that. But it wasn't. So I had to keep working through stuff. And yeah, it wasn't until that point I figured out the medication thing. if I figured that out while I was racing, I would probably still be racing. So that's kind of a bummer, but too late at this point. Yeah, again, if there's anything I can impress on people is, there's definitely no shame or harm in trying the medication route if that's what you need to do for your recovering from your head injury or your mental health. Yeah, taking matters into your own hands despite, what your brilliant neuroscientists might have to say about your case specifically, and just doing what you feel you need to do.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Broglio, we like to close out the show with 1-minute take-homes. I know it's a complex subject, a lot to talk about, but if you could try to encapsulate the biggest message you like people to take home with them from this show.
Yeah, happy to do it. I think the biggest thing I would tell your audience is, certainly you want to take concussion or suspected concussion very seriously, but at the same time, and please go get checked out by medical providers. But at the same time, I really do not think that if it's rapidly identified and managed appropriately, that there's significant concern for any long-term effects. And so, really what we're trying to do at the Michigan Concussion Center is helping people understand that and letting them get back to their sport and lead their best lives.
Trevor, what do you have to say?
This is a tough one because, as I said, I started to dig into the research and just went, I don't even know where to start. This isn't like an injury where you get a skin abrasion and I can tell you exactly what to do to address that. As we said, with everybody, it expresses differently. The recovery is different. So it's an extraordinary challenge you have ahead of you, trying to give any sort of standards that people can use that can disseminate to the sport. So I think you really hit on the 2 points that I would say I learned from you in this episode, which is A, if you get a concussion, it's not the end of the world. But B, take it seriously and be careful and make sure you recover correctly. Chris?
I think I would add something that I learned from talking with Timmy Duggan and some others, and that is kind of the support. We didn't really talk about that in this show, but he had a hard time understanding what life was going to be like after his crash, after the injury, and all the people in the world that had science degrees and medical degrees weren't able to get inside his body and tell him what to expect. So if you have a concussion, if you have a TBI, I think one of the best things you can do is to talk to others that have gone through this and have them try to help you understand what it's going to be like, how long it, by no means just say, oh, their case was like this, so I can expect this. But they can serve as a great support system and help you along the way, help you to set expectations, and deal with some of the psychological ramifications that you might have to address later on because of the injury.
Well, Dr. Broglio, thank you. It was a real joy having you on the show. I hope we can talk with you again.
Please, anytime.
That was another episode of Fast Talk. Subscribe to Fast Talk wherever you prefer to find your favorite podcasts, and be sure to leave us a rating and a review. The thoughts and opinions expressed on Fast Talk are those of the individual. As always, we love your feedback. Join the conversation at forums.fasttalklabs.com to discuss each and every episode and join in on this one as well. Become a member of Fast Talk Laboratories at fasttalklabs.com/join and become a part of our education and coaching community. For Dr. Steven Broglio, Timmy Duggan, Hannah Finchamp, and Trevor Connor, I'm Chris Case. Thanks for listening.